The morning Margaret Thornfield knocked on my cabin door, her perfectly manicured fist hammering like she owned the place. I was brewing coffee and watching the sunrise paint Golden Lake in shades of amber and rose. I had no idea that within 6 months, I'd be orchestrating the largest wedding celebration this sleepy mountain community had ever seen, right under her furious HOA president nose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me paint you a picture of paradise. My great-uncle Harold left me his cabin on Golden Lake, 3 acres of pristine wilderness, a rustic log home built in 1962 and 200 feet of private shoreline that reflected the Colorado Rockies like a mirror. The property sat perfectly nestled between towering pines and aspen groves, with a wraparound deck that caught every sunset and a stone fire pit, where the scent of burning cedar mixed with mountain air so crisp it made your lungs sing. When I inherited the place 2 years ago, I thought I'd found my slice of heaven. I work remotely as a software consultant, so I could live anywhere. After years of cramped city apartments and honking traffic, waking up to loon calls echoing across still water felt like winning the lottery. The Golden Lake HOA governed our little slice of paradise, if you could call Margaret Thornfield's iron-fisted rule governance. She'd been HOA president for 12 consecutive years, running unopposed because, frankly, nobody else wanted to deal with her. Margaret lived in the community's crown jewel, a massive Tudor-style house with perfectly trimmed hedges, solar lights lining every walkway, and American flags positioned at mathematically precise angles. She drove a white Lexus SUV that she washed twice weekly and treated HOA violations like federal crimes. Most of the 37 properties around Golden Lake were weekend retreats or summer cabins. Retirees from Denver, a few tech workers like myself, some old Colorado families who'd been here since the 1970 SC. It was the kind of place where neighbors borrowed cups of sugar and helped each other haul boats out for winter storage. Everyone got along fine. Everyone except Margaret. That particular Tuesday morning in late May started like any other. I was responding to emails on the deck when I heard the aggressive crunch, crunch, crunch of footsteps marching up my gravel driveway. Through the pines, I spotted Margaret's rigid silhouette advancing toward my front door like a general approaching enemy territory. She wore her uniform, a cream-colored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, pressed khaki slacks, and sensible brown loafers that had never seen a speck of dirt. Her silver hair was shellacked into a helmet that could withstand a Category 3 hurricane. In her manicured grip, she clutched a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse. Deep breath, I told myself. Be neighborly. Good morning, Margaret, I called from the deck, raising my coffee mug in greeting. Beautiful day, isn't it? She didn't respond to pleasantries. Never did. Mr. Carter, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. We need to discuss your recent activities. Activities? I'd been living here quietly for 2 years. I paid my HOA dues on time, kept my property maintained, and hadn't received a single violation notice. I'm not sure what you mean. Margaret climbed my deck steps without invitation, her heels clicking against the wood like a metronome counting down to execution. She opened her folder with ceremonial precision and withdrew a stack of photographs. These were taken last weekend, she announced, spreading them across my patio table like evidence at a crime scene. The photos showed my property during my friend Jake's visit. He'd driven up from Boulder with his girlfriend Sarah to help me install a new dock. The pictures captured Jake's pickup truck parked beside my cabin, Sarah reading a book in my hammock, and the 3 of us grilling burgers on my deck while Jake's golden retriever, Buster, chased sticks in the shallow water. I'm looking at pictures of my friends helping me with yard work, I said slowly. Is there a problem? Margaret's pale blue eyes narrowed to laser points. Mr. Carter, Golden Lake is a residential community, not a commercial campground. According to HOA Covenant 15.3, overnight guests are limited to immediate family members only, and the maximum occupancy for any property is 4 people at any given time. I blinked. Jake and Sarah are my friends, and there were 3 of us total. Well, 4 if you count the dog, but… Animals count toward occupancy limits, Margaret interrupted, tapping the photos with one perfectly polished fingernail. And according to our bylaws, immediate family means blood relatives or spouses only. Friends do not qualify. The mountain air suddenly felt thinner. You're telling me I can't have friends visit my own property? You can have day visitors, Margaret conceded, with the magnanimity of a dictator allowing peasants to eat cake. But overnight stays violate community standards. We maintain property values through strict adherence to residential character. This isn't negotiable. I set down my coffee mug harder than necessary. Margaret, with all due respect, I own this property. I pay taxes on it, I maintain it, and I've never caused problems for anyone. My friends stayed one night and helped me improve my dock. How exactly does that threaten community standards? Margaret's smile could have frozen the lake solid in July. Mr. Carter, when you purchased this property, you agreed to abide by our covenants. I'm not here to debate the rules, I'm here to ensure compliance. Any future violations will result in fines of $200 per day per infraction. She gathered her photos with the efficiency of a card shark collecting winnings. I trust we understand each other. After she left, I sat on my deck for a long time, watching eagles circle over the water and trying to process what had just happened. The woman had actually photographed my property like some kind of surveillance operation. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so invasive. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor Eddie, a retired Denver police officer who'd lived on Golden Lake for 15 years. If anyone knew the real story about Margaret's reign of terror, it would be Eddie. Oh boy, Eddie chuckled when I explained the visit. She's really got her sights set on you now. Word of advice: don't give her any ammunition. Margaret collects violations, like some people collect stamps. But friends can't visit overnight? That seems insane. Technically, she's right about the covenant language, Eddie admitted. But it was written in 1987, and nobody's ever enforced it that strictly. Most of us have guests all the time. She just picks and chooses who to harass. Why me? Because you're new money in an old boys club, and because your property is the most visible from the main road. Margaret likes making examples of people. That evening, I dug through my closing documents and found the HOA covenants, all 47 pages of legal gibberish that I'd skimmed 2 years ago. Hidden in the fine print, buried under sections about lawn maintenance and architectural approval, was the guest policy Margaret had quoted. Technically, she wasn't wrong. But technically legal and morally reasonable were 2 very different things. I had no idea that Margaret had already started building a file on me, or that she'd recruited 3 other property owners to help her gather evidence. 3 weeks later, my sister Jessica called with exciting news. Her daughter Emma was turning 16, and she wanted to celebrate with a family weekend at Uncle David's mountain cabin. Jessica lived in Phoenix with her husband Mark and their 2 teenagers. They'd visited once before, shortly after I inherited the property, and Emma had fallen in love with the lake. We're thinking the first weekend in July, Jessica said. Emma wants to invite her best friend Madison. They've been planning this for months. Just a quiet family celebration, maybe rent a pontoon boat and do some fishing. Would that work? My stomach dropped. Jessica's family plus Emma's friend meant 5 people total, which exceeded Margaret's interpretation of the occupancy limit. But this was my niece's 16th birthday. I'd been looking forward to hosting them. Of course, I said. We'll make it special. I spent the next week preparing. I cleaned the cabin top to bottom, stocked the refrigerator with Emma's favorite foods, and arranged to rent a pontoon boat from the marina. I even built a new picnic table so we'd have plenty of room for birthday dinner on the deck. Jessica's family arrived on Friday afternoon in their Toyota Highlander, the backseat packed with teenagers, luggage, and enough snacks to supply a small army. Emma burst out of the car like a firecracker, her long red hair catching afternoon sunlight as she ran to hug me. "Uncle Dave, this place is even more amazing than I remembered." She spun around, arms outstretched toward the lake. "Madison, look at this view." Madison, a quiet girl with dark curls and an expensive camera, was already snapping photos of the mountains reflected in the still water. "This is like something from a movie," she breathed. We spent Friday evening on the pontoon boat, watching sunset paint the sky in layers of purple and gold, while Emma and Madison took approximately 300 selfies. The girls talked nonstop about college plans and summer jobs, while Jessica and Mark relaxed for the first time in months. By the time we returned to shore, even Madison, who'd seemed nervous about leaving Phoenix, was laughing and planning Saturday's hiking adventure. Saturday dawned perfect, one of those crystalline Colorado mornings where the air sparkles and the mountains look close enough to touch. We made pancakes on the deck while loons called across the lake, and Emma opened presents. I'd gotten her a professional-grade fishing rod, which she immediately insisted on testing. That's when Margaret appeared. I spotted her white Lexus creeping along the shoreline road at exactly 8:47 a.m., moving so slowly that other cars were honking and passing her. She pulled into my driveway without invitation and emerged from her vehicle like a process server delivering a subpoena. "Mr. Carter," she announced, marching across my lawn with military precision. "We have a problem." Jessica looked up from where she was helping mark string lights around the deck. "Dave, who's this?" "The HOA president," I muttered, setting down my coffee mug and preparing for battle. Margaret wore another of her power suits, navy blue this time, with a silk scarf knotted at her throat and earrings that caught the morning sun like tiny shields. She carried a different folder, this one red instead of manila, which somehow seemed more ominous. "Mr. Carter, this property currently has 6 occupants," she declared without preamble. "That's a direct violation of occupancy limits outlined in our previous discussion." Emma, who'd been baiting her new fishing hook, looked up with the bewildered expression of a teenager encountering adult stupidity for the first time. "6 occupants? According to HO, a Covenant 15.3, maximum occupancy is 4 individuals," Margaret continued, consulting her folder like a judge reading a verdict. "I count 2 adults, 2 teenagers, and 2 additional family members. That's a violation subject to daily fines of $200. Mark, my brother-in-law, has the patience of a saint and the diplomatic skills of a career middle school principal." He approached Margaret with his hands raised in peaceful gesture. "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. We're families celebrating Emma's 16th birthday. We drove 12 hours from Phoenix for this weekend." Margaret's expression suggested that people driving from Phoenix to celebrate birthdays was somehow evidence of moral decay. "Sir, the origin of your travel is irrelevant to covenant violations. This is a residential community with strict occupancy standards." "But we're his family," Jessica protested, her voice climbing toward the register that meant trouble was brewing. "This is his niece's birthday party. The covenants make no exceptions for birthdays or family celebrations," Margaret replied with the warmth of a parking meter. "Occupancy limits exist to preserve community character and prevent commercial activity." Emma looked like she might cry. Madison had retreated toward the car, clearly wishing she were anywhere else. The morning that had started with such promise was evaporating like mist off the lake. That's when my temper snapped. "Margaret," I said, standing up slowly and using the voice I reserved for particularly difficult clients. "This is my family celebrating my niece's birthday on my private property. We're not running a hotel or throwing a rave. We're making pancakes and going fishing. If that violates your idea of community standards, then your standards are the problem." Margaret's nostrils flared like a bull scenting danger. "Mr. Carter, your attitude toward community compliance is becoming a pattern. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach before this situation escalates further." "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning." Margaret closed her folder with a sharp snap. "You have until noon to reduce occupancy to acceptable levels, or fines begin immediately. I'll be monitoring the situation closely." She pivoted on her sensible heels and marched back to her Lexus, leaving my family standing on the deck in stunned silence. "Uncle Dave," Emma said quietly, "we can leave if you want. I don't want you to get in trouble because of my birthday." The sight of my 16-year-old niece offering to sacrifice her birthday party to protect me from HOA fines broke something inside my chest. I knelt down beside her chair and took her hands. "Emma, sweetheart, you are not leaving. This is your birthday weekend, and no uptight HOA president is going to ruin it. We're staying right here, and we're going to have the best celebration this lake has ever seen." Jessica squeezed my shoulder. "Dave, are you sure? Those fines are worth every penny if it means standing up to bullies," I said firmly. "Besides, I've got some ideas brewing." We spent Saturday exactly as planned. We went fishing. Emma caught a 2-pound bass that she insisted on releasing. We hiked to Eagles Point for panoramic mountain views. We grilled steaks on the deck while telling embarrassing family stories that made Madison laugh until she snorted. When the sun set, we built a fire in the stone pit and roasted marshmallows while Emma made birthday wishes on shooting stars. It was perfect. But as I watched Margaret's house lights burning late into the night across the lake, I knew she was planning something that would make birthday party fines look like pocket change. The next violation notice arrived on a Tuesday, delivered not by Margaret, but by a stern-faced man in a county inspector's uniform. He introduced himself as Dennis Walsh from the Boulder County Code Enforcement Office and explained that he was conducting a routine compliance inspection following complaints about unpermitted structures and potential safety violations. "What unpermitted structures?" I asked, genuinely confused. Dennis consulted his clipboard with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many property disputes. "Fire pit, deck modifications, dock installation, and..." He squinted at his notes. "Possible septic system irregularities." My blood pressure spiked. The fire pit is original to the property, from 1962. The deck repairs were cosmetic maintenance. The dock replacement was professionally installed with all required permits. And the septic system was inspected and approved during my property purchase 2 years ago. "I understand your position, sir, but I need to verify compliance with current codes. This will take several hours." Dennis spent the entire afternoon crawling around my property with measuring tapes, cameras, and instruments that beeped ominously. He examined my deck railings, tested my dock stability, measured distances between structures and property lines, and even stuck a probe into my septic tank access port. When neighbors started gathering to watch the spectacle, I felt heat rising in my cheeks. Eddie jogged over from his morning walk, shaking his head in disgust. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "Margaret made some phone calls." "How did you know?" "Because she pulled the same stunt on the Hendersons last year when they hosted their daughter's graduation party. Code enforcement, fire department, even the health department showed up claiming anonymous complaints. Turned out everything was perfectly legal, but the harassment was the point." By late afternoon, Dennis had completed his inspection and grudgingly admitted that everything was up to code. The fire pit predated current regulations and was grandfathered in. My dock installation permits were valid and properly filed. The septic system was functioning perfectly. "No violations," he said, though he sounded almost disappointed. Your property is in full compliance. But the damage was done. Word spread through the Golden Lake community that David Carter was having problems with code enforcement. Property values were built on reputation, and reputation was built on perception. Margaret knew exactly what she was doing. That evening, she called me directly. "Mr. Carter," her voice crackled through the phone with the warmth of Arctic wind. "I trust today's inspection was educational." Educational? I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "Margaret, you wasted a county inspector's entire day on false complaints. Everything was perfectly legal." "Oh, I'm sure it was," she replied with mock sweetness. "This time, but you'd be amazed how many code violations can develop over time. Deck railings loosen. Septic systems age. Fire pits shift out of compliance. It's really quite unpredictable." The threat was crystal clear. Keep pushing back against HOA rules, and she'd weaponize every government agency she could find to make my life miserable. "What do you want, Margaret?" "I want compliance," she said simply. "Follow the covenants. Stop treating your property like a public campground. Maintain appropriate standards for our community. It's really quite simple. And if I don't?" Her laugh was like ice cubes clinking in expensive whiskey. "Mr. Carter, I've been HOA president for 12 years. I've dealt with every type of difficult resident you can imagine. Some learn to cooperate, others—" She paused dramatically. "Others find that mountain living isn't quite as peaceful as they expected." After she hung up, I sat on my deck watching stars emerge over the lake and trying to process the escalating war Margaret had declared. She wasn't just enforcing HOA rules, she was systematically targeting me with harassment campaigns designed to force me out of the community. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I pulled out my laptop and started researching HOA law, property rights, and something that had been percolating in the back of my mind since Emma's birthday party. If Margaret wanted to play hardball with occupancy limits and community standards, maybe it was time to show her what those rules really looked like when pushed to their logical extreme. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I opened the Golden Lake HOA covenants and began reading every single page with the attention of a lawyer preparing for trial. What I discovered in those 47 pages of legal language would change everything. The idea struck me like lightning during a thunderstorm in early August. I was reading HOA covenants by candlelight. The power had gone out when I stumbled across Section 23.7. Residential properties may host private family gatherings, celebrations, and ceremonial events consistent with the quiet enjoyment of neighboring properties. Ceremonial events. I grabbed my phone and called my college roommate Brian, who'd become a successful wedding planner in Denver. We'd stayed in touch over the years, and I knew he was always looking for unique venue opportunities. "Dave, how's mountain life treating you?" "Brian," hypothetical question. "If someone wanted to host a small, intimate wedding at a lakeside property, what would that look like?" "Are you getting married?" Brian's voice pitched up with excitement. "Because if you are, I have ideas. Your place would be absolutely perfect." "Not me. But tell me about the perfects part." Brian launched into professional mode. "Lakeside weddings are huge right now. Mountain views, natural acoustics from the water, those sunset photos with the Rockies in the background. Couples pay premium rates for that kind of setting. Your property has everything: scenic ceremony space, reception area on that big deck, even guest parking." "What about capacity? For an intimate celebration, maybe 30 to 40 people maximum, depending on setup. You could do ceremony on the lawn facing the lake, cocktails on the dock, dinner on the deck. Very exclusive, very romantic." My pulse quickened. "And that would be considered a private family event?" "Absolutely. Wedding ceremonies are private celebrations, not commercial ventures." As long as you're not advertising publicly or running a business, it's just family and friends, gathering for a special occasion. After hanging up, I stared across the dark lake toward Margaret's house, where lights burned in every window like a fortress preparing for siege. She wanted to enforce occupancy limits and community standards? Fine. Let's see how she handled a perfectly legal, completely legitimate family wedding celebration. I needed a couple getting married. The next morning, I called my cousin Rachel in California. She'd been dating her boyfriend Tyler for 3 years, and I knew they'd been talking about engagement. More importantly, Rachel was the kind of person who'd drive cross-country just to prove a point. Rachel, this might sound crazy, but how would you and Tyler feel about getting married at my lake house? Dave, are you having a midlife crisis? Maybe. But I'm also having an HOA crisis, and I think your wedding could solve both problems. I explained the situation with Margaret, the escalating harassment, and my discovery of the wedding loophole in the HOA covenants. Rachel listened with the fascination of someone who'd grown up hearing family stories about my legendary stubbornness. So you want us to get married just to spite your neighbor? I want you to get married because you love each other and deserve a beautiful celebration. Spiting Margaret is just a bonus. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. Tyler and I were thinking about eloping to Vegas anyway. The whole big wedding thing feels overwhelming and expensive, but a small ceremony at a gorgeous mountain lake with family and close friends. Think about it. No pressure. Dave, I don't need to think about it. Tyler's going to love this idea. When were you thinking? September? The weather's perfect, the aspen trees will be changing colors, and it gives us time to plan properly. September it is. But Dave, Rachel's voice carried a warning note I recognized from childhood. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. I want the full wedding experience: flowers, music, dancing, the works. This isn't going to be some quick ceremony just to annoy your HOA lady. Wouldn't have it any other way. Over the next week, Rachel and Tyler flew out to see the property and meet with Brian about wedding planning. Tyler turned out to be a laid-back software engineer who thought the whole Margaret situation was hilarious. Rachel fell in love with the lake setting and immediately started planning details. We'll keep it intimate, she assured me. Maybe 35 people total. Tyler's family from Colorado, my friends from California, our college gang. Nothing excessive. Brian was in full wedding planner mode, sketching ceremony layouts and reception flow patterns. We can string bistro lights between the pine trees, set up the altar right at the water's edge with mountain views behind you. For the reception, long tables on the deck with centerpieces of local wildflowers. It'll be absolutely magical. I watched them plan my cousin's dream wedding while calculating how Margaret would react to 35 wedding guests on my property. According to HOA covenants, ceremonial events were explicitly permitted. Margaret couldn't claim occupancy violations for a one-day wedding celebration. But I underestimated just how creative she could get when properly motivated. The first sign of trouble came 2 weeks later when I received a certified letter from something called Golden Lake Community Standards Committee, an organization that definitely hadn't existed the day before. The letter, signed by Margaret and 3 other property owners I'd never met, outlined serious concerns about potential commercial activity and traffic safety issues related to my planned event. Planned event? How did they know about the wedding? I called Eddie, who sounded grim when I read him the letter. Dave, Margaret's been asking questions around the community. She knows something's up, and she's building a coalition. That standards committee is new. She probably formed it yesterday just to give her complaints an official sound. Can she do that? She can do whatever she wants until someone stops her. Question is, are you prepared for this to get ugly? Looking across the lake toward Margaret's house, where she was probably plotting my demise over her morning coffee, I realized this had moved far beyond HOA disputes or wedding planning. This had become a war. September 15 dawned with the kind of pristine mountain morning that makes Colorado tourism brochures look understated. The aspen trees had turned to liquid gold. The lake reflected cloudless sky like polished glass, and the air carried that crisp autumn scent that made everything seem possible. Rachel and Tyler's wedding day had arrived. I'd been awake since 5 a.m., partly from excitement and partly from anxiety about Margaret's inevitable counterstrike. She'd been ominously quiet for the past 2 weeks. No surprise inspections, no threatening letters, no dramatic confrontations. With Margaret, silence was more terrifying than open warfare. The vendor convoy arrived at 8 a.m., Brian's catering team, the florists, the string quartet Rachel had insisted on hiring from Denver, and the photographer who specialized in outdoor mountain wedding. By 10 a.m., my property was transforming into something from a fairy tale. Bistro lights stretched between pine trees like captured stars. White chairs arranged in perfect rows faced the lake, with an archway of aspen branches and wildflowers framing the altar. The deck had been converted into an elegant reception space with long tables draped in ivory linens and centerpieces of golden sunflowers and mountain laurel. "Dave, this is incredible," Rachel breathed, emerging from the cabin in her flowing white dress that seemed to capture every ray of morning sunlight. "I can't believe this is the same place where we used to catch frogs as kids." Tyler, resplendent in a charcoal gray suit, couldn't stop grinning as he surveyed the scene. "Your HOA lady is going to lose her mind when she sees this setup." "That's the point," I said, though a knot was forming in my stomach. Margaret had been too quiet. She was planning something. The first guests began arriving at 11 a.m. Tyler's parents from Fort Collins, my sister Jessica's family. Emma was ecstatic to be back at the lake, and a steady stream of Rachel and Tyler's friends from California and Colorado. Everyone marveled at the mountain setting and the elegant transformation of my rustic property. By noon, we had 34 guests mingling on the lawn, sipping champagne, and taking photos against the backdrop of golden aspens and mirror-still water. The string quartet was warming up with gentle classical pieces that echoed beautifully across the lake. That's when Margaret made her move. At exactly 12:15 p.m., just as Brian was directing everyone toward their seats for the ceremony, a convoy of official vehicles came roaring up my driveway: 2 Boulder County Sheriff's cruisers, a fire department truck, a code enforcement van, and Margaret's white Lexus bring up the rear like a general surveying conquered territory. My heart dropped into my boots. Sheriff Deputy Linda Martinez climbed out of the lead cruiser, looking apologetic but determined. I'd met her during a community barbecue. The previous summer she lived 2 lakes over and seemed like a reasonable person. "Mr. Carter," she said quietly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've received multiple complaints about unpermitted public assembly, potential fire code violations, and concerns about traffic safety." "Multiple complaints?" I gestured toward the elegant wedding setup. "This is my cousin's wedding. We have 34 guests celebrating a private family ceremony." "I understand, and honestly, it looks beautiful. But we have to investigate complaints when they come in. This'll just take a few minutes." Margaret emerged from her Lexus wearing a black suit that looked suspiciously like morning attire and carrying a folder thick enough to serve as body armor. She'd brought reinforcements: Harold Grayson from 3 houses down, a retiree who'd apparently never liked anyone, Patricia Mills from the North Shore, whose primary hobby was complaining about property tax assessments, and someone I didn't recognize but who wore the same grim expression of righteous indignation. "Deputy Martinez," Margaret announced, marching across my lawn like she owned it. "Thank you for responding so promptly. As you can see, this property is hosting a commercial event without proper permits or safety precautions. Rachel, who'd been chatting with her bridesmaids near the altar, turned toward the commotion with a look of disbelief that was rapidly transforming into fury. "Are you seriously trying to shut down my wedding?" "Ma'am, I'm not trying to shut down anything," Margaret replied with fake sympathy. "I'm simply ensuring that our community maintains appropriate standards for safety and compliance." Tyler stepped protectively beside his bride, his jaw set in a way that suggested his laid-back software engineer persona was about to disappear. "This is a private wedding on private property. What possible safety concerns could you have?" Margaret opened her folder and began reading from prepared notes, like a prosecutor delivering opening arguments. Unpermitted assembly of more than 12 people. Fire code violations related to open flame decorations. Traffic safety hazards from excessive parking. Potential liquor license violations. Noise ordinance concerns regarding amplified music. Each accusation was technically absurd, but designed to sound official and threatening. I could see wedding guests clustering together nervously, whispering among themselves about whether the ceremony would be canceled. That's when I realized Margaret had made a critical tactical error. She'd brought the law enforcement cavalry to shut down what she assumed was my clever scheme to circumvent HOA rules. But in doing so, she'd revealed the depths of her harassment campaign in front of 34 witnesses, multiple county officials, and a professional photographer who was documenting everything. I walked over to Deputy Martinez, pulling out my phone and opening the document I'd prepared for exactly this scenario. "Deputy, I'd like to show you the HOA covenant that specifically permits residential properties to host private family celebrations and ceremonial events. I'd also like to show you the guest list, proving every person here is either family or close personal friends. And I'd like to point out that Mrs. Thornfield has been systematically harassing me with false complaints for months, including the frivolous code enforcement inspection she triggered in June." Deputy Martinez took my phone and scrolled through the HOA covenant text, her expression growing more skeptical with each line. "Mr. Carter, this clearly states that ceremonial events are permitted on residential properties." "That's exactly what I told her," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "But Mrs. Thornfield seems to believe that HOA covenants don't apply when she personally disapproves of legal activities." Margaret's face was turning an alarming shade of burgundy. "Deputy, this is obviously a commercial wedding venue operation disguised as a family event. No one spends this much money on decorations for a simple family gathering." "Actually," Rachel interjected, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of a bride whose wedding day was being threatened, "this is my wedding, and I paid for these decorations because I wanted my special day to be beautiful. Is there some HOA rule against flowers and nice tablecloths?" The fire chief, who'd been examining my property with professional thoroughness, approached our growing crowd. "No fire code violations," he announced. "All open flames are properly contained, fire extinguishers are accessible, and emergency vehicle access is clear." The code enforcement officer emerged from his van, shaking his head. "Property's in full compliance. Same as it was during the June inspection." Margaret looked like a general watching her battle plan crumble in real time. Her reinforcements, Harold, Patricia, and the mystery complainant were shuffling nervously as it became clear that their complaints were not only unfounded, but potentially legally questionable. Deputy Martinez handed me back my phone and turned to face Margaret with the expression of a law enforcement officer whose time had been wasted on petty neighbor disputes. "Mrs. Thornfield, based on my investigation, this is a legal private wedding on private property with all appropriate permissions and safety precautions. I don't see any grounds for further action, but the occupancy violations apply to overnight guests, not daytime events," I interrupted, consulting my own folder. "As clearly stated in HOA Covenant 15.3, subsection D, which you apparently forgot to read. That's when Margaret played her final card. "Deputy Martinez," she said, her voice rising with desperate authority, "I demand that you arrest Mr. Carter for deliberately violating community standards and creating a public nuisance." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear aspen leaves rustling in the breeze. Deputy Martinez stared at Margaret for a long moment, then turned to address the wedding guests who were watching this drama unfold like spectators at the world's most uncomfortable theater performance. "Folks, I apologize for the interruption. You have a beautiful wedding setup here, and I hope you have a wonderful celebration." She looked back at Margaret. "Mrs. Thornfield, filing false complaints is a misdemeanor offense. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach to neighbor relations." As the official vehicles departed, leaving Margaret and her supporters standing on my lawn like defeated generals surveying a lost battlefield, something extraordinary happened. Wedding guests began applauding. It started with Tyler's college roommate and spread through the crowd until everyone was clapping and cheering, not just for the resolution of the crisis, but for the sheer audacity of Margaret's failed power play. Rachel grabbed my arm, tears of laughter streaming down her cheeks. "Dave, this is the most memorable wedding day in family history. Years from now, we'll be telling our kids about the time crazy HOA lady tried to arrest the wedding party." But Margaret wasn't finished. As she stalked back toward her Lexus, she turned and delivered one final threat that would change everything. "Mr. Carter, you may have won today's battle, but this war is far from over. By the time I'm finished with you, you'll regret ever setting foot in this community." Watching her drive away in defeat, I realized Margaret had just given me the greatest gift possible. She'd revealed her true nature in front of witnesses, documented her harassment campaign on official record, and threatened me publicly. Most importantly, she'd underestimated just how far I was.